Hello, this is Nick Schmidt, Professor of Psychology. This short virtual session will cover the topic of improving communication and transparency with your students. The emphasis will be in the context of assignments or assessments, the variety of assessments we give, and ensuring that students know the purpose of those assessments. You can start by thinking of one assessment that you have students complete. What's the purpose of that assessment? It might be designed to assess their factual knowledge of a topic, maybe some critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills. Perhaps it's also classified as a formative assessment. You're going to give them feedback to gauge their learning so they can improve their learning. Perhaps it's a summative assessment, something you've done after you've given them a formative assessment. But regardless, you probably understand the purpose of the assessment and what it's designed to do. Sometimes, though, the bigger question is, do your students know the purpose of the assessment? We all probably hear students sometimes say, when am I ever going to use this? Or, I hate when teachers give busy work. If students are saying those things, there's generally one of two things going on. You either actually don't have a good purpose for the assessment. In other words, you are giving them busy work. Or probably what's more likely is that you just aren't communicating the purpose effectively. Now, I'm not perfect. I've been teaching for almost 16 years full-time at Heartland, and I've learned from feedback from students about my assessments, and that's one of the reasons I'm sharing this information. Imagine the scenario, two different scenarios over the same thing. Which scenario would you be most motivated to complete the work? Your boss says, Larry, I need you to count the ceiling tiles. You say, why? Your boss says, because I instructed you to do that. Scenario 2, your boss says, Larry, I need you to count the ceiling tiles. You say, why? And your boss says, because they're old and dusty, probably unhealthy. I'd like to order new ones for the sake of your health. Most people would obviously work harder and work more carefully in scenario 2. That's because people are much more likely to complete work with effort when they know the purpose of the work. This is especially true when we know there are personal benefits to be gained from that work. If you put this same scenario in the context of an assignment, are we just giving students work to do? If you've ever felt that students aren't putting enough effort into it, or maybe enough students aren't doing the work, maybe it's because we're not emphasizing the importance of that work. Or maybe because the work really isn't that important. So what should you assess of students' learning? You have the freedom to assess all kinds of things. But there's a couple things that you're obligated to assess. That is, you're obligated to assess student achievement of learning outcomes. And by learning outcomes, I'm talking about the course learning outcomes and the essential competencies for the course you're teaching. In the master syllabus of the course you're teaching, you should see a list of learning outcomes. The course learning outcomes are specific learning outcomes to the course you're teaching. Most master syllabi also have a list of essential competencies. The essential competencies are the broader learning outcomes, the goals of education at Heartland in general. Those essential competencies fall into 4 categories: problem solving, critical thinking, communication, and diversity. The sample you see on the screen is from an Introduction to Psychology course. These are the course learning outcomes. Not all of them, actually it's just a sampling of the course learning outcomes. And these are the essential competencies that relate well to those. Those essential competencies are defined more specifically down here. Not all master syllabi have probably been updated enough to include the descriptions down below like this one does. But you can always find those essential competencies on the assessment committee's webpage if you need to see how those are defined. With that in mind, much of what we assess in terms of student learning should be geared towards these learning outcomes. And these learning outcomes should be clearly stated to students as the purpose of the assessment. As I mentioned earlier, you can assess a lot of different things, and not all of your assessments have to be related to these learning outcomes. There's lots of other things you can assess as well. But I like to keep that in mind when I'm designing an assessment, to consider what the purpose of that assessment is and how it relates to these course outcomes and essential competencies. The methods that you use to assess student learning can be various. There are all kinds of ways to assess student learning. And so that is almost kind of irrelevant unless the method you're using to assess is not a valid way to assess the learning outcomes or whatever objective you have, whatever it is you're trying to measure in student learning. So when students are asking, when am I ever going to use this? Consider maybe students who are solving matrices in mathematics course. When am I ever going to use this? Well, maybe they aren't going to use it. But can you communicate with them ahead of time, maybe, what kinds of thinking skills are they using to solve those problems that will benefit them in other courses or in life in general, life outside of college? So to kind of sum things up, we should state the purpose directly in the instructions. What is the purpose of the assignment? If you're assessing specific course outcomes or essential competencies, there's nothing wrong with listing those in the assignment instructions. It also never hurts to simply explain to students why the assessment is important. And again, if we can't do that as instructors, then maybe we need to reconsider what the real purpose of that assignment is, if it really does have a good purpose. Here's some examples. In an assignment I give over the topic of memory, at the top of the assignment, I explain what the purpose is, and I also address the specific thinking skills that I will be assessing. When students complete this assignment, reading over the instructions, even on their own, it's obvious to them that there's a specific purpose for this assignment. I'm measuring something meaningful, something of value. In the scoring guidelines, which I think are also important for students to see in assignments, I would always include the scoring guidelines or scoring rubric, so there's no ambiguity from students about where the points for the assignment are coming from. And as you can see, I've got a couple items with an asterisk, and down below kind of pointing out the specific parts of the assignment that are geared towards the critical thinking skills that I mentioned in the instructions. So I hope you find this short video useful. May not be anything earth-shattering or new to some of you, but I think regardless of how long we've been teaching, it's always good once in a while to step back and think about our assignments and what's the true purpose of those, and are they really meaningful and necessary. Thank you.